A big thanks to our sponsors, Friday Pulse, for their support of this episode. We've got their CEO, Nic Marks, on to share a little bit about them.
Yeah, Friday Pulse is a measure of the happiness of your organizations. And we are launching a campaign called First Measure Free, which is you can have your first measure of the happiness of your teams for free. And that will give you lots of great reporting on what's going on at that level. So you can decide what you want to do next.
And just say that you heard about them through the podcast so Nic can take me out for dinner when you become a client.
Absolutely do.
Happiness feels like a big topic to bite off in a 30-minute podcast. It's very personal and it feels multi-dimensional and incredibly complex. It also feels weirdly at odds to the sorts of things that we're expected to care about as business leaders. My guest today has a different opinion. He's been described as a statistician with a soul, which I think is a little unfair on statisticians generally. I'm sure it's fair on you, Nic. But so Nic's a happiness expert, and he spent the last 25 years measuring people's quality of life, well-being, and happiness. He's the CEO of Friday Pulse. And that's a business dedicated to giving employees a voice and helping senior leaders to understand what drives employee productivity and happiness. Whilst I'm sure that joining us on We Need to Talk About HR is the peak of his public speaking career, he's also had a talk at something called TED, TED, yeah? It's been watched over 2.5 million times. So needless to say, Nic, absolutely pumped to have you on the podcast and looking forward to getting into it with you.
Thanks very much, Felix.
So let's jump in with what's probably sounds like an easy question, but isn't. But what's happiness?
What is happiness? Yeah. So at its simplest, happiness is a good, bad signal. So when things are going well, we feel happy. When they aren't, we don't. It's got many more rich layers to it than that, but in that way, it is a signal. It's a signal. It's an evolutionary signal that things are okay. And so both happy and unhappy are motivating. Happy is motivating to carry on, put your energy into it. This is going well. Unhappy is motivation to change things. So if you're a happy frog, you stay in your pond. If you're an unhappy frog, you hop off to somewhere else. So at the very simplest level, it's that. And happiness is also what we call a positive emotion, a highly functional positive emotion, again linked to motivation. But if we think of the sort of major emotions that we feel, and you can think of Pixar's Inside Out if you want to think of a sort of an analogy with this,
Inside Out 2 coming soon, I hear.
Yeah, I'm wondering where they're going to go with that. But I mean, actually, one of the advisors, Pixar are brilliant about their science, actually, in lots of ways. One of their advisors was a psychologist called Paul Ekman, who developed a theory of primary emotions in the sort of 60s, 70s. And primary emotions are things like anger, fear, sadness, and happiness. And they're what universally we all label in the same way. Emotions are much richer than that. But at a simple level, the next simple level from the good, bad signal, happiness is one of the primary emotions. So anger and fear about the fight and flight mechanism. Sadness is about a loss, slows us down so we can process the loss. Anger rises our energy so we can deal with an injustice, and fear helps us evade a threat either by running away, freezing sometimes. There are different things you can do with fear. Happiness, meanwhile, positivity, whether you call that joy like they do in the Pixar movie, is about creating and seizing opportunities. If we think of high energy happiness, it's enthusiasm, which is helping us achieve a goal. We can think of lower energy happiness like contentment, which is sort of appreciating what's going on. So it's a complex space, but it's very positive.
Well, positive is good. Feels like we need a bit of that at the moment. So before we dig into what it means for businesses and all of that, how are we doing in happiness at the moment? If you take a big macro picture, UK, world, what's going on?
So I know the UK data better than the world data. So let's talk to what I actually know. But so pre-COVID, in an average week, about 55% of people would say they were happy. And at the moment, we're trundling along about 45%, wow. Which it doesn't sound much of a drop, but at a population level, you're thinking UK's got 60 million people, okay, 40 million adults. So you're talking about 5-8 million people, less people who happy in any week than were before COVID. So it's a pretty big, no, so 2, 3, sorry, my maths is out there. So 2 or 3 million. It's a big effect. So definitely we are suppressed. And that's even taking the time of year into account on that. So in the UK, we've definitely got something going on. And some of it might be left over from COVID. Some of it is probably sheer fatigue at our governments. But I think a lot of it is about work also. I think there is a crisis going on in work. We saw COVID gave an example, opportunity for people to have more flexible working, which was grasped. Now we can talk about that, whether that's good or bad. I think there are short-term gains and long-term risks with that. But that, the younger generation most certainly are much less happy than they were 20, 30 years ago. In happiness, we normally talk about there being a U-shaped curve of happiness, that the young are happy, the middle-aged are least happy, the older are most happy. Don't get too worried about it. It's a really small effect, by the way. But what we've seen with that curve, which comes out at a population level, is it's gone more straight. So the young are the least happy. So the shape of the curve has changed. I mean, you could have expected from COVID, everybody was a little less happy, but actually it's fallen more on the young. So there's definitely an issue at the younger generation around happiness and how they're feeling.
You know what? I mean, the COVID piece doesn't surprise me at all. I really feel sorry for young people. Really anyone going through like a big transition during COVID, and you think about how much you changed socially, I guess between 13 and 25, and the lessons you learn and the how you get better at interacting, how you move from school to university or college or your first job. There's so many formative experiences there that I think probably got watered down quite a lot in a remote only world. So I'm not surprised about that happiness in the youth. But I mean, that 10% drop, that's really significant. What are the impacts sort of outside of people just not feeling happy? What happens?
So, I mean, everyone can think for themselves. Think about a time when you were really, let's do it at work because we're a work podcast, when you're really happy at work, you're really enjoying your work. Think how good you feel. You're probably working with people that you like on a project that you really believe in. You're using your strengths. It's great. And then if you think about a time, you can think about a time when you're really unhappy at work, but actually what we tend to do is we tend to leave when we're very unhappy at work. So we don't tend to stay very long in that place. But think more as an analogy about when you're just okay. You're just okay at work, you're going in, you're doing your work, and that sort of dullness that sets in. Mm. I think that's what's happening. It's not, I mean, yes, we have it, you can think of happiness, the spread of happiness as like a bell curve, a normal distribution. And if everybody's a little less happy, there probably are some more people that are clinically depressed, but that's very, the end of the bell curve. It's more people feel a bit, and haven't got that enthusiasm.
Yes. And I might be an interesting outlier in a case study because I've only really had one job. I set Instant Impact up with my best friend when I left university, lucky enough to be able to do that. But we've had to stick at it even when things were really hard, when we weren't able to get the revenue in, we were struggling to find clients, our team were leaving, all of that with a different business model, by the way. Yeah. So we're much better. But, you compare that when I remember our office was in Vauxhall. It's this really depressing stretch of road. Or it's much better now, but whatever it was, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was sort of part sort of rundown corner shops, part late sort of early morning nightclubs. So after everyone had done the actual clubs, they go to these nightclubs and it closed at 10 a.m., right? So we'd walk past people who were still partying on a Wednesday morning. You didn't... Yeah. I'm sick. I can't come into work. But you walk past that, and it was sort of a rainy London day, and you have this sort of pit in your stomach. This sort of, you can't believe I'm going back to what was at the time like we were small business, relatively depressing, sort of drab office. That's hard, and I compare it, as you say, to now. I'm loving my job right now. I walk into work with a smile on my face. I get to do amazing things like this podcast where I get to meet interesting people like yourself. If I look at the energy levels I'm able to bring to work that in that instance 10 years ago and now, I mean, it's chalk and cheese. And I can only imagine that, you know, I know we're going to be talking about productivity later and the sort of link up between happiness and productivity, but I can only assume I was a much more productive employee now. I am a better employee now than I would have been then.
Absolutely. And positivity, happiness is very, very linked to, so yes, we can talk about productivity as an outcome measure, but there are all sorts of intermediary variables, I'd say, as a statistician. So things like collaboration, creativity. When you are in a more positive mode, you can see the bigger picture more. You can see how things could the possibilities more. This is why, in a way, happiness is about creating and seizing opportunities in life. So the negative emotions about avoiding threats, positive ones about creating and seizing opportunities. So, you know, when we're feeling down or just, you know, we're sort of in an internal world. We're narrow. We don't think very broadly. And when we feel good, we can think up in here. So if your business has a need for creativity, now you can say creativity in a big way, but creativity is problem solving. Mm-hmm. You know, creativity is dealing with complexity. If you're dealing with a disgruntled customer, you need creativity in order to deal with that. So let's not just think it's about art. It's about how do you spontaneously in the moment help solve problems with other people. Mm. And when you are in a good mood, you can do what we call mentalizing better, which is mentalizing is a pre-empathy step. And it is our ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And it's something we learn as a toddler and we develop more through our teenage years, right up until mid-20s actually. And if you're in a good mood, you can do that much easier than if you're in a bad mood. In a bad mood, you're in your own stuff. Good mood, your own stuff's good. So you can deal with what's going on there. So that means that you can deal with complexity. Most jobs involve a need for complexity. If the employee is in a bad mood, perhaps their boss is annoying or they've got day-to-day frustrations in their job that are not being dealt with, they're not going to be as innovative, creative, collaborative, and that's going to cost you.
That's really interesting. You know, I think actually, I have a question. I know we're a work podcast. I know we're talking about work. Let's just talk about politics really quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a link then between our decrease in happiness and what I see as a pretty worrying rise in an inability to empathize with others' point of view?
I don't. Whether that's politics or the internet, I don't know. So we've got echo chambers on the internet, so that I think people, you know, get into where they're talking just people the same opinion. So they don't use that muscle of actually thinking about how someone else feels, and everything gets very shouty, doesn't it? Mm. You know, and so I think that's a problem, and I think that's seeped into our politics. And black and white thinking. It's sort of how psychology thinks about it. You know, 1-0 thinking one way or the other is sort of ingrained in humans. You know, we tend to think it's an all or nothing world where normally it's everything in between. Mm. And so it's much easier, it's much less cognitive processing time to just say, oh, it's this or it's that, than to deal with the middle space. Which is why I very deliberately at the beginning talked about happiness and unhappiness, but talked about okay in the middle. Because okay is a much bigger problem than unhappiness.
Why?
Many more people just feel okay. So in your business, you know, whatever business you run, listener, you might have a few people who are unhappy. You will know about them, and you should tackle it, as in be empathetic to what's going on for them. They will be bringing people down around them, but you're going to have far more people who are just okay, and you won't be worrying about them because they're not making a fuss. There's no alarm bells going about them. But that's where your productivity gains can come from, is helping the okay feel better. That's where it's at in most businesses.
This is awesome. I can't wait to delve into this a little bit more detail. But before I do, you and I have both been, I think, interchanging happiness and productivity.
Yeah.
Why is it that I think I felt the need to do it, I think because I was a little embarrassed to talk about happiness in a work context, just being honest with you.
Yeah.
But why is it that productivity is so part of discourse and the metrics that we track as an organization, and even on an economic level, whereas happiness isn't, whereas maybe happiness is a richer, as you say, it's got all the intermediary, I can't remember the other word that came after that, but the
variables,
intermediary variables in between. So you get sort of a richer picture of what's going on in an organization. So why don't we look at happiness more?
Well, of course, I think people should look at it much more. I mean, happiness, feeling good at work impacts two pain points for businesses, two big ones. So one of them is productivity. The other is staff turnover. And actually those two variables amplify each other. They build on each other. So, if you've got an employee that is unhappy, they're low productive, they're going to leave much quicker, which means you're not going to get any return on investment from you do recruitment. I would assume that most of your modeling will say people need to stay in a role for about a year before you really start to get payback on that recruitment process.
That's right. Yeah.
So if someone only stays 9 months, you've lost money on them. So if they're unhappy, they're going to leave. This, average tenure in the UK is 5 years. That's for over 25-year-olds. Under 25-year-olds, it's shorter, right?
Yeah, and I think if you look at in the professions, so if you're looking at white collar jobs, we do a lot of work in financial professional services, sustainability. I mean, we're looking 2.5 years, 2 years.
Yeah. So you need to have good fit, and good fit is a joint responsibility between recruitment and the organization, particularly the teams that people land in, the people they work with most. And so our experience at work is very, I would say, proximal, to use a statistical term, but it's very related to the people we work most closely with. Mm-hmm. Obviously very related to our team leader, manager, supervisor, whatever you call it in your business. They have a particular influence. So team leaders need particular support to be great team leaders, because they're going to impact 3 to 10 people, depending how many people they manage. So, but it's a joint responsibility, because you need good fit in the recruitment process. So it's really worth investing in your recruitment process because
yes, listeners, it is.
Well, it is, because, if you get bad fit, they're not going to stay long and they leave, which I'm sure is one of your KPIs for your clients.
Well, it's interesting. It is definitely one of our KPIs. And we look at, we do a measure about 6 months in, or sometimes tied to the probation period, and we're looking at whether hiring manager, having worked with someone for 6 months, would make an enthusiastic rehire, and we call that a good hire. Yeah, it's a bit of a reductive measure, but I think these things, if you're surveying and you'll make it and you're tracking over a long time, you get a good feel for it. I would love to be able to push that time frame further, but there's a feeling we have in the organization, because we look at the recruitment challenges, admittedly over a long term, but we limit ourselves at the moment to talent acquisition. There's sort of a feeling that actually there are so many factors outside of our control on the happiness of a new hire. And as you rightly say, I think by far the biggest is the quality of the management that they get. So we are looking at where we can support our clients, and maybe this is a first step. But what are the sort of steps that people leaders can be putting in place to ensure a continual iterative improvement on the happiness in their organization?
So I'm thinking where to start with. So teams really matter, and you can find teams where people are happy in organizations where predominantly people aren't happy, and you can find the reverse. People are predominantly happy and they're unhappy in certain teams. So there are what I call lots of microcultures in an organization. There's not just one culture. And so teams become the opportunity to improve the happiness in your organization. And team leaders are often under huge amounts of stress. Mm-hmm. They're under huge amounts of pressure. The pressure from above tends to be around the team outputs, the business outcomes that you want from it. And there's pressure put on them that they should be delivering them. And I'm not saying that's unreasonable, but that's the pressure. But from below, they have the sort of happiness, well-being, even mental health, pressure from their team coming upwards. So they are caught in a bind. And let's be frank, across the UK, 80% of managers have had absolutely no training in people skills.
And get no support.
And get very little support. Very little. They assumed, just like parenting, you assumed that you can just be a good parent, but you'd have learned from your own parents and your friends and maybe a few books. But, a good team leader will have read a lot and will have thought a lot about the people stuff. But the reality is 80% of them get no training in people skills. So Google did a huge study of this in the 2000s. They were actually, Google were growing. They think about efficiency and effectiveness and everything, and they kind of thought that team leaders weren't the most critical thing to them, that the developers were. And so they wanted to study about how few team leaders they could have. This is literally true. It's called the Oxygen Project, and whether they really needed them. And what they discovered was actually how important team leaders were. And they listed out these skills, and they listed out 10 skills, and 7 of those are absolutely people skills. The top ones, are they a good coach? Do they look after their team's well-being? These are the things that most mattered for the output, for the outcome of those teams. And I think we need to really recognise, I think the UK is particularly bad at this, at training people, but actually it's pretty much a global issue, that team leaders need to be given a time budget to look after their team. So it's not just done on the side. It's not got their own work and, you just fit in managing your team where it is. Leading a team takes time. You need to have one-to-ones with people very regularly. I will always say, I think you should have a start of the week meeting with your team. What's gone well last week? What hasn't gone well? Let's build on what's gone well, because we take too much. We just move to the next challenge. We don't stop and celebrate what's gone well. And let's face it, all of us are insecure human beings. We like a bit of appreciation. There is nothing weak about that. I said insecure, but there's nothing. Of course we do. We thrive with sunlight. We thrive with warmth.
I love a bit of recognition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really important, being appreciated, being recognised, being respected. These are massively important things. You can't do that if you've got no time budget to do that. You can't do that if you're incredibly stressed about delivering your goals and trying to drive your team. You might drive results in the short term, but you'll drive people out of the business. And then without ruining your business model, you're going to have more recruitment, and actually, to be honest, you should almost create yourself an indicator that we need less recruitment because we've done such good hires, which must be a tension for you to say, but
no, I would love to. I would love to do that. Generally speaking, we work with growing companies, so that would probably be a bad. I don't think they'd like that indicator, but I would love to. We do look at reducing attrition. So that is, and it's. I mean, to the point, and where our oh no, you're going to get me on the industry now, but I think where our industry has gone wrong in its shape is that it looks too much at making hires, talent acquisition, and not enough at talent with a capital T, the broader talent picture. So how do we develop internal people to fill this job instead of going and getting people externally? How do we look at skills in the future and reskill people rather than risking redundancies? How do we think about training people up rather than making an expensive senior hire? So I love that. That's our way of thinking, and maybe we will earn a little less client by client, but we'll win more clients out of the back of it. So that's the right
all
attitude. Good.
Yeah, that's definitely the right attitude, so good fit. As I said, happiness at its most simple level is a measure of good fit. So that's important in the recruitment process, and it's important in the retention.
Oh, I've got a challenging question for you.
Go on then.
Right, everyone talks about diversity.
Yeah.
And how important it is, as I do, by the way.
Yeah.
How challenging is it? Is it more challenging to create happiness and fit, as you said, in a team that is very diverse? Is it harder to do that than it is in a team that's more homogenous?
I honestly can't give you a statistical answer to that. I mean, I haven't studied it. I haven't looked at the data. I don't have that nuanced data. So sometimes we have ethnicity in our data, but I have not looked at it at the team level. It would be the issue with things like diversity at a team level where you're talking about under 10 people is that you're going to have a lot of variability there. You might have some teams with 3 people, some with none. Doesn't mean to say that they are non-diverse if they're none, because would you be picking up neurodiversity in that? Would you be picking up, sexuality diversity or whatever you call it? You wouldn't pick up it all up. So I wouldn't really know. But what I do know is that happy teams look very similar, which is that they respect each other. They obviously get along with each other. They play to their strengths. They challenge each other. Challenge is good for happiness.
Challenge is good for happiness.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's why I asked the question about diversity, because I thought, do people like being challenged? Do they like hearing other opinions? But
like every variable, it's an optimization rather than a maximization issue, which is that if you're over challenged, and it's beyond your skill set or your time ability, then that leads to high stress, and that's a problem, right? Okay. Medium levels of stress are not a problem at all for happiness. So much bigger problem for happiness is boredom than stress.
Yeah.
4 or 5 times the impact on happiness that stress is. Not that you shouldn't deal with stress at all, but it's not the most. And highly stressed is really bad. But and then inspiring them, which is about meaning and doing something that you believe in. So I call those 5 things: connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. And every happy team has those qualities. Every unhappy team, a bit like Tolstoy starts Anna Karenina, every happy family is the same, every unhappy one as it is unhappy in its own way. I think that's the same with teams. I think happy teams look pretty similar. They can be doing really different tasks and roles, but they're going to have those ingredients in it. And so when I work with organizations, I'm a statistician, so I'm going to use survey tools. That's what we do. It's the first thing we do. We do an audit effectively of every team about how they're doing on those 5 things. And that forms the basis for the organization to think about what they need to do to improve that.
What do you think of annoyingly, we're running a little short on time. So, but what do you think of what do you think of the red flags for a business leader to see? I've got not an unhappy organization, but I've got too many okay people here.
The red flags for okay are slightly less easy to spot, but I would look at your feel of energy in the organization. So happiness is very energetic. Okay is not energetic. Unhappy can be energetic in a fiery way, but so it's unstable. So I would look for, how energetic do your teams? What feeling do you get? I mean, actually, in some ways, we are exquisite creatures at picking up emotional signals. It's really paid us in our evolutionary past to understand how someone else feels. So if you've got a feeling, follow it up. And this is why I think data is really helpful, because everyone thinks happiness is intangible. One, it's not. It goes up and down. That data I told you from COVID is basically a happiness measure. For the majority of our clients, we measure happiness weekly because it goes up and down so quickly. And, and an early warning system is things looking quite flat there. For some people, that's too much. So we do quarterly measures too. But you're looking to see which areas are flat. And actually, you can think of those areas as your problems, but those are your opportunities. Yeah. Those are your opportunities for where you can improve your business. And so, actually working out particularly what's not going right in those teams, supporting the team leaders to fix them. Most team leaders, I say, are under-supported. Okay, some possibly are toxic, but that's your fault for promoting them to it. Yeah. So, people go, people join an organization, they leave a manager. Well, no, that's still the organization's fault. They've appointed that manager. They haven't supported that manager. They haven't given that manager feedback on why things aren't going right. So, team leaders, managers, supervisors, whatever you call them, are critical, but, support them because they want to do a good job. And also it's in their self-interest. It's wonderful leading a happy team. It's a right pain leading an unhappy one. So it's in everyone's self-interest. It's in the self-interest of the employee, the team, and the organization. I'm
really interested that most of your interventions are at the manager-leader level.
So I would say that's most of where the interventions need to be. My business, we do the measurement part. So we're more like a zero accounting business where we do the stats for you than we are a financial consultant or a growth thing. So we will create the data for you. We create tools. We take create a really nice weekly tool, which is basically building on what's gone well, tackling what hasn't last week.
And that's the Friday Pulse.
That's the Friday Pulse, but we also offer quarterly, which is more of a diagnostic. And we identify training needs for you, but actually we don't particularly deliver that training. You know, you'll have your own people you can work with. So we're trying to be, as a business, the zero accounting of happiness.
Zero is an awesome company.
It is. It is. Yeah.
It sounds like a really good ambition. So I think we're gonna have to wrap up, which is a shame because I've really enjoying this conversation. How about pulling it? If you feel free not to answer this, I should have said at the beginning. Any of my questions, you can tell me to sod off. But what do you think are the things that make you happiest?
Me happiest?
Yeah.
In life?
Sure.
I mean, in life, for me, it is having a project that I'm working on that I find meaningful. You know, I'm approaching 60 and I'm still massively excited by my work. I look at quite a lot of my friends, then they're tired and knackered and feel like cutting the grass for the next 20 years rather than doing so. I'm like, oh, no, I've got this to do. So I think having something that enthuses you is massively important. And that can be a hobby. It doesn't have to be work. You know,
yours isn't a hobby though. It's writing a book at the moment, right?
I'm writing a book at the moment. And that is not a source of pleasure. It's an accomplishment I wish to do, but writing is a painful process. You know, well, for me anyway, I know, I think very few people find it an easy process. You see these sort of authors who look like they're easy and they're beautiful writers. They are the minority. It's the sweat. But I mean, why am I writing a book? Because I've got stuff to share and I can share it on podcasts. But a book is a really good way to share it. And it also gets you invited to do more stuff. You know, I do public speaking. I do speaking within organizations. A book will help do that. I'm here. I've accumulated a lot of knowledge and hopefully, you know, an insight over the decades, and it's decades now, and you'd be ashamed to die without sharing it, wouldn't it? So
absolutely.
So that's the thing. So having that, and then for me, it's having a relationship. You know, as I got my kids, but they've left home. But you know, my relationship with my wife and my friends are very, very critical to it. So I think of a good life as a really good mixture between pleasure and meaning. You want both of those in your life. Pleasure's much more short term, more hedonistic if you want. Meaning is more longer term. It's sort of, you know, if you want to use the Greek term for it's eudaimonic, it's called instead of hedonic, but basically it's a life well lived. And I don't think it's enough just to have meaning. I think these people say, oh, you don't need happiness, you just need meaning. I think that's rubbish. I think you need that day-to-day happiness as well. That's your energy, that's your vitality. But if you've only got that and you haven't got the meaning, it, you know, that becomes a bit, you know, meaningless, you know, if I can just use the other term. But, you know, we know what happens. We've had it happen to friends who just follow the pleasure principle. Doesn't end well.
It does not.
Yeah.
Nic.
Yeah.
This was really fun.
It was, wasn't it?
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much indeed.